Hey, Garrett, thanks for joining us today. As way getting started, give us a little background on yourself.
Yeah, thanks, Brian. Appreciate you having me. Big fan of the show, so this is cool. Yeah, so Garrett Whitmore, been in sales for a little under 12 years, all with the same company, so I'm a little bit of an old soul in that regard. But yeah, grew up here in Richmond, Virginia, went to school here, and like I said, I've been in sales for 12 years, so excited for the conversation.
Cool. And why sales for you?
Well, accidentally, like everybody else, right? You didn't plan on it.
The only thing I could guess.
Yeah. So actually studied political science in college and had aspirations for law school and quickly realized the ROI of that in terms of what I could get done with law wasn't going to happen. So yeah, like everybody else, stumbled into sales accidentally, but it's been great ever since. So my father was in medical device sales for J&J for 25 years. So I guess I have the bug a little bit. My brother's also in sales. So yeah, that's probably the best answer I can give you.
Yep. And that first year, what was that like? Because you started off doing technical recruiting, right? So,
Yep. Yep. So my firm does a combination of IT staffing and professional services. When I started almost 12 years ago, you kind of have to run the business from the ground up on the staffing line of
okay.
business. So yeah, first year, very tough. I remember multiple Friday nights driving home, like I'm done with this. Like, what am I getting myself into? Like maybe I should try to go to law school or whatever. So a lot of effort, not a lot of cash. Typical kind of runaround. But I'll tell you, like the building blocks of that first year in terms of what you learn and the skills you develop are invaluable. So I remember vividly, and I try to tell myself even now when things are going well, not to stay too far removed from that first year.
Yeah. Well, what about that first year to really set it up for you?
Man, learning how to hear the word no and don't
Yeah.
call me and other stuff that I can't say in the podcast. But yeah, you learn how to sort of develop that grit, right? And I played college golf at JMU, college in Virginia, and so I always really loved the grit and the sort of the eat what you kill, so to speak, and was also used to tough feedback. So I think the first year really was you're making 1,000 phone calls, or you're working late, or you're working on weekends, but you're not seeing it show up in your paycheck, right? So I think over the years you learn how to not only continue to work hard, but how to work smarter and how to do things in more of a to make it more efficient in terms of how you can drive revenue. So yeah, the first year was just a lot of effort, not a lot of cash. That's the best way I can summarize it. Probably similar to most of your listeners, right?
First year is pretty tough.
Yeah. It is still tough in certain days, but I think again, I mentioned earlier, I'm with the same company, so I've kind of built up that skill set internally, right? But yeah, a lot of long nights, a lot of long drives home on Friday nights, thinking like, what am I doing? Why did I get myself into this? Why am I still here?
And then you kind of either picked or were assigned a very tough territory.
Yep. So, as you alluded to in previous podcasts, I've been basically selling into the government my entire career since I got into the sort of we call it outside sales. Initially, federal government. Now I do all state and local for Commonwealth of Virginia. So, to your point, it's a crash course in selling effectively, understanding contracts, understanding how folks buy, understand how the pace is very different than selling into a commercial enterprise, right? They don't have money falling off the trees like the big boys do, right? So yeah, it was good, but I will say even that first year in like the real, quote unquote sales job, we call it account manager. Same thing, right? You're on the road, you're meeting with people, you're trying to get in the door and establish value, and it's a lot of blind faith that first year. So it wasn't really until I want to say 2 years or so, maybe even longer, that I started to see a lot of ROI in my sales career.
Wow.
Um, and since then, I've kind of split territories, I think 3 or 4 different times. And, now I'm sort of in a player coach role where I oversee a team, but also have my own book of business. Then I also have kind of a secondary, like national role. Um, but I always think back, like in terms of those first 2 years in sales, because it's kind of separate from the recruiting piece. It really is just like the quality of the activity, and how you're actually building your brand within your customer base.
Yeah. And when did the light bulb go on, where it went from a grind to kind of fun or financially rewarding to,
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good point. So, well, when your paycheck looks different, that's when the light bulb really goes off, right?
Doesn't it?
But I would say, I think when you start to get some, you get that call on a Thursday saying, "Hey, we want to issue a statement of work, right? We want to actually use you for this book of business," or, "Hey, we've had a few different projects coming down the pipeline. Your company was what I thought about from our, multiple lunches or dinners or whatever." So I think just when you start to really click and get from that over that hump of discussion to, "Hey, we're actually signing a PO or an SOW." I think that's where that sort of bolt of confidence comes through. And there's really a fine line between that and just living in that, general vendor community where you sort of get lost in the shuffle. So I think for me, it was just when that happened, right? It sounds kind of basic, but really the light bulb went off when you can realize, hey, I'm actually having the right dialogue with these folks. I'm getting wins. I'm getting statements of work. And then that builds your confidence. And then what you find is, like, in this roundabout way, is now your messaging gets even better because now you're selling with confidence, right? Whereas before you were just kind of, okay, this is the playbook. This is what I should be saying. Cool. Never gonna happen for me. So I think when that happens, that's where it really takes off.
Yeah. And did your company have much traction within the state of Virginia before you?
Uh, yeah, we did. But it wasn't anywhere near what it could be, right? And still we're still climbing. So we had a presence in there and we were doing well, but we just had some untapped revenue streams from either direct business or through partners that just needed some extra attention. And I think when we went to specializing, just because when COVID happened, and this is interesting timing, but I actually made the territory shift right before COVID. So I'm like, oh man, like now I went from half commercial, half federal to all state and local in the states, or like, what did I do to myself? But I really honed in on that as a specialty and just was 100% state and local for Virginia. And you kind of have to force feed yourself all the knowledge of the Commonwealth, the contracts, the good, bad, and the ugly. And I think ultimately, I realized, hey, besides just doing direct business, there are so many revenue streams that we're not even looking into. And fast forward 4 years later, it's one of the top growth markets in our company for state and local.
Yeah.
So it's a good thing.
So your company understood what it's like to sell to state and local?
Yeah, so like many big companies, we're vertically split. So our government practice has, your state, local, your federal, your higher ed. So we've had a very rich state and local practice across the country for some time now. And it's politically, right, it's harder in some states than others, right? So in Virginia, we were doing well, but again, we could apply some things learned in other states towards Virginia, which is what we did, and that ultimately led us to accelerating growth.
And for the people who have never sold to state and local, could you kind of bring up why it's different and harder?
Yeah, I've kind of come to appreciate it, almost prefer it. It is very much around, I mean, the contractual piece and your barrier of entry is the first thing to be understood, right? It's not as simple as, hey, here's a statement of work, can you sign it? It's, hey, I have to go through a certain, layer of a cooperative purchasing agreement or a resell contract, or I have to get through, maybe you have to be a certain, whether you're a small or women-owned, minority-owned firm, you may have to go in with that route. And then also wait 6 months for them to review it. So it can take the timeline and the complexities of that you have to really lean into and not fight it. And I found that when I went from commercial to government, I had to learn that on very quickly. It was like, okay, well, this is not as simple as, hey, hurry up and sign this. It's, hey, we'll take 3 months to redline that one sentence and we'll get back to you. And yeah, we'll see you in a few months. So it's like that paradigm is so much different in government. And then, but I also think too, the funding mechanisms are different, but there's more things available from like a federal grant or a state general fund. So I think there's some cool ways that you can do it. And what I like about state local is there are actually a lot more ways in terms of creative ways to engage than people might think. So what I've loved about that is it's kind of opened up my eyes to different ways to engage and create value. And the last thing I would say is there's so much more business than people think in state and local, especially. There are so many large agencies that tie into it. I mean, case in point, during the pandemic, state and local governments got all that CARES and ARPA funds, and I ended up having one of my best years ever in 2021 because of that, right? So there are a lot of hidden values, I would say, in public sector that people just, oh, it's government, it's slow, it's hard. There is a little bit of an inaccurate depiction of that, in my opinion.
Yeah. And I did mostly federal, so I
Yep.
understand what you're up against. And I like the part you describe, the areas that you do like,
Yep.
because sometimes they're more open to taking a meeting than commercial is.
Yep. And in some ways, I mean, and the most big companies have, government and commercial, but in some ways there can be less foot traffic from a vendor community, all right? Because these guys are
Yeah.
getting calls from, commercial to IT software, IT hardware, IT resale, IT staffing, IT services, systems integrators. And, it's not as much, but I always tell my team, the biggest thing we would need to focus on is differentiation, and that's it, right? Because these guys are getting those calls from that community all day long, and they all sound the same. Hey, this is John from so and so company, and I want to take time to learn about your business. And then they get into the meeting if they get it set, and it's just an interrogation of 40 questions, and it's the same questions that everybody else asks. So what and I also think too, it's like, man, these vendors or these managers probably think they have to work hard because they have to answer 40 questions on every meeting. So, I've told my team just it's all about differentiation, right? How do you go on and show up differently? And that isn't always asking 1,000 questions. It can be sharing a point of view, almost like a free consult, right? To where you're talking shop about that challenge with that agency or this national trend. And it becomes almost like two guys having a conversation at a barbecue, right? So I think there's less foot traffic at the state level, but I still think those concepts apply
Yeah.
for sure.
You kind of have to take it more like an account manager or a partner versus a vendor.
Yeah, and exactly. And I think when we talk about actually selling, it's showing up and having those discussions. It's not being able to take an order, right? It's not
It's
being
not,
able
there's no
to.
order taken.
Yeah, exactly, right. And when you get to the point of taking orders, enjoy it while it lasts, right? Um, so there's that kind of that juxtaposition of people who just do account management and take orders and their customer service, they're very yes sir, yes ma'am, whatever you need. And then there's also the kind of the folks that like to go out and hunt, right, and be on their own and enjoy the messiness of getting in front of folks or going to conferences and adding value. And I think that ideal salesperson kind of lives right in the middle to where they can do both at the same time. But also just understand that like, this is a game at the end of the day, right? This is a qualitative profession. It's not around 1 + 2 = 3. If I have 10 meetings, I'm gonna grow X amount of revenue. It's a very intangible, messy game, sales is. And I think folks who can really understand that and live and breathe it ultimately spend their time where they're supposed to. And then from there, grow revenue.
And I like the term game because game kind of condenses something complex into something understandable.
Exactly. I mean, really, it really is kind of like, like I was at a conference yesterday running around and meeting with folks and trying to get in front of this person because if I got in front of that person, they could put in a work for this person who controls this procurement. So it's like, man, this is kind of like in a roundabout way, like almost like a scavenger hunt. It's fun. It's like, am I really getting paid for this? Some ways you have to kind of pinch yourself a little bit. But yeah, I mean, I ultimately think it's really around just how do you sound different from everybody else who's calling on that person? And that comes from preparation, right? And I harp on that big time. But at the end of the day, too, it's really around can you intrinsically know that this client wants to know about this, but you're going to go about it in a route that's not traditional. You're not going to ask them 30 or 40 questions and pepper them and then follow up 3 weeks later and say, hey, just want to follow up. Let's connect again. So I think that's just the biggest thing. And there are so many sales professionals, as you know, in the market today. And the training has gotten really good, but at the end of the day, you have to take training from the practice field to the field. And I think that's the biggest thing where people fall down.
Right. Because in state and local, you don't have the profit motive.
Right.
You don't have a competitor. You have a competitor, they don't, right? The state doesn't
Exactly.
compete with federal government.
Exactly.
Funding is bizarre, to say the least.
Yep. Yeah.
How did you learn all that?
It was kind of just Google was my best friend for a while, right? And
Yeah.
and ask honestly, we have a partner ecosystem where we work with large integrators and SIs, and I have some good relationships where I would just ask and say, hey, like, is this correct, or what does this acronym mean? Because the government loves acronyms. So does our company too. So it's really just kind of going from when I entered the territory to now, it was very much a build a plane, but flight, right? understand what these cooperative purchasing contracts mean, understand, how we have to engage or what we can't do, right? So it was a lot of Googling, a lot of asking for help, a lot of probably should have known that when I met with this guy to begin with, but now I know it now, so it's okay. So there was a lot of that. But it was, years and years of just research and immersing myself in the territory. And, I mentioned earlier, I studied political science, and I always joke now that I'm using my major finally because I'm selling into state and local government. So, when someone says block grant or category, it's like, oh, I remember I had that in state and local 101 in college. So I'm using my degree now in some aspects.
And what do you wish you learned back the first year that you know now?
Oh man, don't take it so seriously. And it's easier said than done when you're fighting paycheck to paycheck as a kid out of college, and then you spend your whole tab at the bar that weekend, and now you're like, okay, I got to pay the car payment, I got to pay
You
rent.
bailed out.
Only once. No, I'm joking. No, I think it's really just around like this is a profession and it's serious, but at the end of the day, like don't put so much pressure on yourself to be perfect around this exact message or calling the perfect person, right? I think we tend to overthink it sometimes in sales because at the end of the day, the more and more pressure we put on ourselves and the more we try to sound like something like that we're not, the worse it becomes for the person on the other end of the phone or the email. So I would say find ways to relax, be yourself, apply the prep and the methodology, but at the end of the day, let your natural personality take over. And I think earlier on, I forced it a lot, and I tried to almost do something that wasn't really me or my process. And I think over time, I realized it's hard. Sales is hard, but it's not as hard as we make it out to be sometimes. I think sometimes we become our own worst enemy and we get in our own way.
Yeah.
And I tell my team the same thing. It's like, you guys are overthinking it, or you're getting in your own way. You have the knowledge, you have the prep. I've seen you do it. Just go and do it. It's a game. So that's what I would say.
Yeah, because I think too many people feel they have to act the part, talk like a rep, say what a rep would say.
Which is what your clients don't want to hear. They don't want to hear you talk like yeah. So, I mean, but there's a fine line between like showing up and winging it. We have some of
You don't
these.
want to wing it either.
Yeah. And I know a lot of guys and they're more in a commoditized sale. It's not so much complex, but they'll show up and just, just all you have to do is pick up the phone and talk to them, or, hey, just show up and do this. It's worked for me for 30 years. I'm like, well, yeah, but selling printers is different than selling an enterprise cloud solution, right? And nothing against that, but it's a different ball game. So I think there's a fine line between that, but then also being like this very scripted, if I do A and B, C will happen. And I think, like I said, that middle ground is where I think the personality sell and the preparation and content meet together, almost like an event diagram. I think that's where the best sales folks live.
Yeah. Like golf, you can't try and swing like someone else.
Yeah. Yeah. I've tried that too. It doesn't work.
But then it takes thousands of swings to feel natural at it.
Yep. There are a lot of cool similarities that you can draw between golf and sales. And, in sales, you have a pre-shot routine, but then when it comes on to play, you trust it and you play and you let your natural instincts and personality, I say, but your natural game take over. All the preparation, all the practice was on the driving range or the putting green. But when you get on the course, it's art, right? It's very much around, you instinctually know what to do and then you hit different shots, but the natural flow of the game. So I always say, like, I don't think there's any science in sales besides just the content. I think it's mostly an art and a performance, as you said, right? So I think that's where the cool thing you can take over. And honestly, in sports in general, right? Being prepared, working as part of a team, but then once it comes time to be on the court or on the course, it's an art form at that point.
Yeah.
So
But that's why the coach has you do the certain things hundreds of times.
exactly. Yep. So no, it's a good point.
And how long does it take to learn the rules of golf? 15 minutes?
Yeah, exactly.
And a lifetime to become good at it?
Yeah, exactly. Yep. 100%.
And I think that applies directly to sales.
Yep. Yeah. And the other thing too is you asked me what I would have done differently earlier. I would have taken clients in the golf course much earlier than I did now. Missed opportunity.
Yeah. And people would think that government folks wouldn't want to do that.
Yeah, that's a good point. And, like I mentioned, our partner ecosystem is really where that comes into play because it's business to business at that point. So, in my role too, and like I said, I'm in this player coach role, which I like. You get to do a little bit of oversight and management, and then you're still have your finger on the trigger, right? You still get to close stuff. So, in that regard too, it can be internal, right? But yeah, it's a good point.
And the thing about public sector that's completely different than commercial is in public sector, the reps who do what you're doing build an ecosystem, system integrators, resellers, other
Yep.
vendors that aren't
Yep.
competitors.
Yeah, and that's what I said earlier. I think we were not tapping into as many revenue streams as we could have, right? Because the SI ecosystem, alliance or channel partners, different SaaS companies that we can liaison with an end customer, resell contracts, even partnering with other firms that do what we do, but maybe they have a smaller footprint and we can help them kind of scale. And then there's always the direct route, so yeah, I think that's the cool thing that I like about government as well, is there's just so many options to engage more than what's on the surface, right? So, and then you have the contractual options, you have the funding mechanisms are so different. If you really take the time to learn all of it, you almost in some ways think that public sector has more of an ability to scale than private sector, and I know some guys who in our office, they have one enterprise account, that's their entire portfolio. But the complexities of that are so much different. Whereas if you have an entire state like I do, you quickly realize that, and I also have a local government as well, you quickly realize that the ability to engage in some of these agencies is not as hard as you think it is. There's not as, you're not calling, the enterprise app development team isn't 300 people like it is at an enterprise, it could be 20. So yeah, there's just, again, going back to the creativity, that's, I think, what I enjoy the most about state and local.
And what do you look for in a rep when you're hiring or you're
Yeah, that's a good question. Let me know when you figure that out. But I think I don't look for the quintessential, A-type personality that's, easy to get along with. They want to go have a beer after work. I look for folks that are very inquisitive and question things and uh, like to understand why things happen, to where, if they're with a client, they're going to ask the right questions and understand it, but they're also going to be, inquisitive about, okay, well, walk me through how this helps your environment, or, hey, why wouldn't you do this? Or walk me through how this is going to get you from point A to point B. So I look for folks that are very business minded, but they also have a certain sense of curiosity that really sparks a customer's mind. And I think that's an intangible that it's hard to necessarily get in an interview. But I do, the typical stuff like, work ethic and organizational skills, that's kind of table stakes. But I really like to find folks that ideally have experience in sales, but they have that certain like curiosity bug that just makes me think they would be able to further qualify a customer's needs without being the typical, hey, let me follow a script, let me go in and ask the same 20 questions, right? So that's the biggest thing.
and have you found it that because in commercial you always look for a champion, the change agent, the person who really wants to do this because
Yep.
they have to help you run the gauntlet.
Yep.
In state and local, or even in federal, trying to find a champion who both has the drive, but also has the internal credibility
Yep.
to change.
Yeah.
Or do you have to take that role on yourself?
I think it's situational to the end client, but I have found that in especially some of the bigger public sector clients, you have the ability to find folks that maybe aren't in a decision-making role, but can be that champion. And then ultimately you find out that they are the ones that behind closed doors said, hey, we should use this company for this, or hey, we should shortlist them. So with the business that we're in and, staffing and consulting and services, right, we have folks that we are placing on these client sites that are the eyes and ears to what's happening. So in some ways they can be our champions or folks that bump up against
That's
them.
true. Yeah.
So, but in our professional services side of the business, it's different, right? You have to kind of go in and find those champions. So, and I think sometimes too, if you find the right person, they can really be sort of your inside sales channel in some degree, right? Around where is this project coming from? How do we get the funding? What roadblocks am I going to run into? Is this going to be something that's wired for somebody else? So I think it's situational. I've had times where I've had to do it myself, but I've also found times to where we find that right person that you click with, and they don't mind being that kind of, I almost call them like a principal consultant. They can sort of do that for you.
Yeah. And do you run into a lot of people who explain why it's impossible to do anything?
Never,
That particular,
never,
never,
never.
never seen that.
No, I've never heard people make excuses. I've never done it myself, obviously. No, yeah, for sure, right? I mean, I think, and that's where it goes back, like the person that we identify, especially for sale. That's like, are they someone that understands that this is going to be hard, that they're not going to just show up and have one meeting and hit the yearly sales goal. They can handle adversity, right? That's another thing I would look for. They can handle rejection. They can see that this is an investment for a year or 2 years before you really see the return on investment. So I think folks that have done that before, first off, are great. But I do think there's something to be said for, I have a territory. I'm going to attack it with this exact strategy, and I'm not going to worry about the results right now. I think that's a very rare skill set.
Yeah. Because it's not stimulus response. It's,
Exactly.
faith pretty much that you're doing the right
And
thing.
most sales folks, right, are A-type, right, or A-type-ish, and they want to have quick wins. They want to see something happen. And especially if you're an athlete, it's like, I want to see a quick result, whether it's winning a game or scoring a touchdown or whatever it may be. It's against our primal nature to not do that. So it's a very rare breed to find someone who is okay with that. And to your point, isn't always knocking down your door the next day saying like, woe is me, and this territory sucks and I want to leave, but that never happens.
Yeah. And how'd you keep your head on straight that first year? Because it'd be easy to
Oh,
go
yeah.
to law school, get an MBA, go sell
Yeah. And
something
then
else.
and then you're looking back, and I have friends now who have done that and have looked back and say, man, I should have been in sales. That's a good question. I think there was some blind faith. I think we had our company has a great culture, like a lot of other companies do, but I think there was some management there that really kept me in check and talked me off the ledge a couple of times. But I really thought it was, I'm not going to come in and quit. I'm not going to be that guy that, quits when it gets hard, or I'm not going to quit after the first year. I gave myself a 2-year window, which I thought was appropriate, but that first year was just really around keep doing the right things, it'll happen, for you. It sounds simple, but it was really just discipline around show up every day, work hard, try to have the right attitude. Some days harder than others, and do what you were taught to do, and ultimately it'll come to fruition. And I sort of had this in some ways start over when I got into the account manager job. Same exact song and dance, right? So now when I see folks that have started out, whether it's in our company or other companies, and they jump ship after 9 months, and then the next company they do the same thing, and it's like this revolving door. And I'm always wondering, like, how do they keep getting hired by these companies if they've never showed anything? It's like they must interview well. So I think I'm more of an old dog, and that I've been with the same company, not for blind reasons. There's reasons as to why, but I think you have to be able to give yourself the ability to fight through hard times and be resilient. Because if not, this is not the profession for you. There are a lot of other easier ways and less stressful ways to make $70,000-$80,000 a year than this, right? But so I think it really boils down to what person are you and what do you want? What's important to you? Is it money? If money's not top two, I'm a firm believer sales is not for you.
Yeah.
And honestly, I think it should be number one. But if it's not top two, I have I've gotten to back and forths about this around, we want to do this. And now I'm like, that's all great, but you are going to be miserable if you are not money motivated in this job.
Right.
So I don't know, but I think long answer to your question, but I really think those are the big important things.
Yeah, because your mind is constantly saying, why? Why am I doing this? Why are
Yeah, why
we?
am I torturing myself? Even some days, I was dealing with some client, fires this morning. I'm like, man, what am I? This was supposed to be a nice, easy
What am I
day.
getting myself
All set
into?
up, and then you walk into the day, it's like fire here, fire there. But yeah, I think you have to, like I said earlier, you have to kind of love the messiness of it and the intangibles of sales, because it's not a clock in at 8 o'clock, sit in your spreadsheets, go on this meeting, then go home. It's not as organized as that. So you have to really embrace that and like that, it's almost a lifestyle, right? In some regards, because, early on, you might be working 60, 70 hours a week. I certainly was, and I wasn't making any money. And now some weeks, you may work 40 hours but you're making more money. So it doesn't make any sense, but that's the beauty of it.
Yeah, cool. Hey, really appreciate your time. Where can people go to connect and follow you?
Yeah, thanks for having me, Brian. Yeah, I'm on LinkedIn like everybody else. Garrett Whitmore, happy to connect and answer any questions. And thanks again for the time.